You're going to do exactly what I tell you, you insolent little black girl, or you can pack your things. Manager Kevin dragged Natasha toward the bathroom, away from the security cameras. The restaurant buzzed with a low hum of clinking glasses and polite conversation, but Natasha's heart raced in her chest. Her arm burned where Kevin's fingers gripped it, dragging her through the narrow hallway toward the bathroom. She had never felt this powerless. Until now. You're going to do exactly what I say or you're out of here. Kevin's voice sliced through the air, harsh and filled with disdain. His breath was hot with anger. The anger that Natasha had become all too familiar with over the last few months. Have you ever discovered the person you know isn't who they claim to be? Kevin, her boss, had been nothing but cruel to her for months, reducing her to nothing more than a pawn in his game of control. His actions were about to cost him more than he could imagine. When the people you bond would have been living a lie, how can you trust anything was real? Natasha had felt the sting of Kevin's arrogance and prejudice for far too long. But tonight, something would change. He didn't know it yet, but he was already caught in the web Natasha had meticulously woven. Would you forgive someone who hid their entire identity, even if they did it for love? Natasha's eyes flickered the bathroom door ahead, her mind racing. What Kevin didn't know was that his world was about to shatter, and Natasha was the one holding the hammer. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been forced to take the low road while quietly collecting your strength, this story is for you. Can you imagine the sweet satisfaction of turning the tables when no one expects it? Stick around to find out how one underestimated waitress changed everything. Kevin pushed her forward, his grip tightening as he shoved her down the narrow hallway. Natasha's mind was clear, but her heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the heat of his breath, could hear the sound of his shoes scraping against the floor. But she didn't flinch. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. Kevin's anger had been escalating over the past few months. His racist comments, his degrading treatment of her, and the others at the restaurant, they all added up, and Natasha had been methodically documenting each incident, each slight, each corrupt transaction. Tonight was the culmination of it all. The moment he would finally realize that the quiet, composed waitress he'd been tormenting wasn't as helpless as he thought. "Let go of me," Natasha said softly, her voice calm but firm, carrying a weight that surprised even her. Kevin sneered, his grip on her arm tightening further. "You think you can refuse me? You little stuck-up black girl." His words stung, but they no longer held the power they once had. He didn't realize it yet, but he was no longer in control. Natasha had taken back her power long before tonight. She'd never spoken of her husband to anyone at the restaurant. She wanted to build her own reputation, away from the shadow of his influence. But now, she could feel it, the way her body hummed with anticipation, knowing that Alessandro was only moments away. He had been her silent partner in this plan, the one who had supported her from the shadows, never questioning her methods, never asking her to step aside. He believed in her, and now she would prove to Kevin just how much she was capable of. "Let go of me," Natasha repeated, her voice steady as she faced him. Her lips curved into a small but deadly smile, one that made Kevin hesitate. "You really don't want to do this." Kevin laughed cruelly, pulling her toward the bathroom door. "Who's going to stop me? Your little husband? That failed mechanic who can't even give you a decent life." That was the moment the calm, collected Natasha had been waiting for. She didn't flinch, didn't react, but she could feel her pulse quicken. She had spent the past few years silently building the perfect trap. Kevin was about to walk right into it. From the shadowed corner near the back entrance, a cold, controlled voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You should let go of my wife. Now." Kevin froze. His heart seemed to stop as he slowly turned, his face draining of color. Standing in the doorway, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, was Alessandro Moretti, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding a quiet confidence that filled the hallway. Behind him, two intimidating bodyguards stood at ease, their expressions unreadable. Kevin's legs trembled as he staggered back, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. I didn't know," he stammered, his arrogance slipping away as his face flushed with fear. "It's just a misunderstanding." Alessandro took a step forward, the weight of his presence like a wall crashing into Kevin's delusions. "A misunderstanding?" Alessandro repeated, his voice slow and deliberate. "You called my wife an insolent little black girl and dragged her to a secluded place without cameras. That seems too specific for a misunderstanding, don't you think?" Natasha stood tall, her body language shifting slightly, just enough to give Kevin a glimpse of her true strength. She'd spent years playing the part of the docile, invisible waitress. But tonight, Kevin's cruel treatment of her was finally coming to an end. He had underestimated her, but that mistake would cost him more than his pride. Kevin, now visibly shaking, tried to regain some semblance of control. "She's been a problem, Mr. Moretti," he said, his voice shaky. "She's been questioning procedures, refusing to follow orders. Like when she refused to accept a bribe from Senator Richardson. Natasha stepped forward, her fingers lightly pulling her phone from her apron pocket. With a casual flick of her wrist, she held up the device, the light of the screen flashing brightly in the dim hallway. "Kevin, over the past 6 months, I've been recording every one of your crimes. Every bribe, every racial slur, every illegal transaction." The words fell from her lips with a calmness that made Kevin's stomach twist. His face drained of color as he stared at the phone in her hand, his mind racing to process what was happening. You recorded me?" His voice cracked as his gaze shifted from the phone to Natasha's eyes, where the calm fury burned. Natasha smiled, the first real smile she'd shown all evening. "You didn't think I was just some black waitress, did you, Kevin? I have a degree in business administration from Northwestern. I speak 4 languages. I have a master's in hotel management. And I've been working here because I want to, not because I have no other choice." Her words sliced through his arrogance like a sharp blade, cutting to the layers of his ignorance and leaving him exposed, vulnerable. Kevin had treated her as nothing, just a tool to be used. But Natasha had never been what he thought she was. And now, she was about to dismantle everything he had built, piece by piece. Kevin opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was defeated before he even realized it. His mind scrambled for a way out, but there was no escape. Alessandro watched the exchange with quiet pride. Natasha had insisted on working undercover to gather the evidence, despite his reservations. But now, as she took control of the situation with calm precision, he couldn't help but admire her. She was everything he had always known her to be, and more. "You didn't just humiliate me," Natasha continued, her voice steady and firm. "You humiliated Maria in the kitchen. You harassed Jessica, the sommelier, and you systematically stole from your customers. But what you didn't know, Kevin, was that I was keeping track of everything. Every single thing." Kevin's last attempt at a defense came out as a desperate plea. "We can come to an agreement. I have valuable information about competitors. I know things you wouldn't believe." Alessandro's smile was cold, the glint in his eyes dangerous. "You're offering information to the man who's known everything about you for years. My wife wasn't here to uncover secrets. She was here to gather evidence." Natasha's voice grew even more casual, as if discussing a mundane matter. "Senator Richardson will be very pleased to know your transactions have been recorded, as will Judge Morrison, Congressman Walsh, and the many others you've been facilitating for years." Each name she dropped hit Kevin harder than the last. Each powerful figure now an enemy he had helped create. Kevin's knees buckled beneath him, his desperation growing. Please, I have a family. I can testify against the others. I can fix this. Natasha's gaze was ice cold. You don't understand, Kevin. We don't need your testimony. We already have everything we need. Thousands of pages of documents, high-definition recordings, forensic analyses. You're not valuable anymore. You're the end product. As Kevin's world collapsed around him, Natasha opened a briefcase she had carried with her, a briefcase he had seen countless times, always assuming it contained nothing but reports or customer complaints. But now, the documents inside were his destruction. Photos of him drinking with corrupt politicians. Papers detailing his forgeries. Each image, each page, a step closer to his downfall. You remember March 23rd, Kevin? Natasha asked casually, flipping through the papers. That's when you deposited Senator Richardson's campaign check into the restaurant's personal account. Kevin's mind reeled. No, this can't be happening. But it was happening. Natasha had methodically built a case not just against him, but against an entire network of corruption. Kevin was just one small part of it, one vulnerable link in a chain that would soon break. The door to the back office burst open as FBI agents swarmed the restaurant. The sound of boots hitting the polished floor was drowned out by the deafening ring of justice. Kevin's legs buckled beneath him as agents surrounded him, cuffing him without resistance. His face was drained, eyes wide with panic as reality finally set in. You're under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, racial discrimination, and conspiracy to commit federal fraud. Michael Santos, Alessandro's trusted advisor, read Kevin's rights in a calm, measured tone. Outside, the wail of sirens filled the night air as a fleet of federal vehicles surrounded the restaurant. The echo of the sirens was like music to Natasha's ears. This was the moment she had planned for, the moment Kevin would finally be forced to face the consequences of his actions. For all his power, his money, and his years of bullying and belittling, he was now nothing more than another criminal who had been exposed for his corruption. As the agents began to drag Kevin away, he turned to Natasha one final time, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice trembling. Natasha smiled a slow, almost imperceptible smile, the first real emotion she had allowed herself all night. "Because I wasn't pretending, Kevin. I'm a waitress with 2 degrees, a woman who is married to one of the most powerful men in Chicago, and I just dismantled your life. I've been working under your nose, gathering everything you've done. You thought I was weak, but you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated me." The weight of her words hit him harder than any of the physical blows he'd received. He had thought she was just another insignificant employee, a woman with no voice, nothing to offer but her compliance. He had failed to see the power she had quietly amassed until it was too late. As the door of the federal vehicle slammed shut behind him, Natasha turned to Alessandro, her expression unchanged. "Has the press been informed?" "Channel 7 News goes on air in an hour," Alessandro confirmed, his voice low, filled with the satisfaction of a plan coming to fruition. Operation Clean Plate. The largest corruption network in Chicago dismantled, thanks to my wife. Natasha stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the situation wash over her. It had all been worth it. The humiliation, the quiet suffering, the meticulous planning. Now it was paying off. Kevin had thought he was untouchable, his connections and influence making him feel invincible. But Natasha had known better. She had played the long game, and it had led to this moment of victory. But there was more to it than that. As the FBI agents took Kevin away, Natasha realized something even more profound. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about the petty revenge of a woman who had been wronged. No, this was about something much bigger. It was about exposing an entire system, a network of corruption that had rotted the city from the inside out, and she was the one who had brought it down. She turned to Alessandro, her eyes meeting his with a quiet confidence. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked softly. Alessandro smiled, his pride in her palpable. "Yes, it is. But you've done more than I ever could have imagined, Natasha. You've shown the world who you truly are. And now, they'll see you for the powerhouse you've always been." Natasha nodded, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. She had spent years in shadows, watching, learning, gathering evidence. But now, the world would see her for what she truly was, a woman of intellect, strength, and determination. And she was just getting started. As the press began to descend on the restaurant, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in front of her face, Natasha felt a strange sense of calm. She was ready. The world would soon know her story, and she would use her newfound influence to do more than just clear her name. She would change the system. The next few days would be a blur of media interviews, press conferences, and public appearances. Her name, Natasha Williams, was trending, and not just in Chicago. Across the country, people were taking notice. The woman who had once been dismissed as just a waitress was now one of the most influential figures in the city. She had exposed corruption, stood up to a powerful man, and turned her pain into something greater than she could have ever imagined. But even as her star rose, Natasha couldn't help but think about the next step. She had already turned the tables on Kevin, but there were bigger battles to fight, and she wasn't done yet. The weight of everything she had uncovered, the politicians, the judges, the businessmen, was heavy, but Natasha was prepared. Alessandro, ever by her side, was more than just her partner. He was her rock, her biggest supporter. When she had suggested working undercover, he had been hesitant, worried for her safety. But now, seeing the results of her work, he couldn't have been prouder. Weeks later, Natasha found herself standing on a stage at the Chicago Convention Center, accepting the National Anti-Corruption Award. A crowd of over 2,000 people stood and cheered, their applause echoing through the auditorium. The governor of Illinois handed her the gold plaque, his words ringing out across the room. "It is an honor to recognize a woman who not only exposed corruption, but completely redefined our understanding of how prejudice and privilege fuel criminal systems." Natasha smiled, the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about making a real difference, about changing the course of history, about ensuring that those who had been silenced would finally have a voice. She had done it. She had turned the pain of those years into something meaningful. And she would continue to fight for justice, for fairness, and for the truth. This was her legacy now. She wasn't just Natasha, the waitress. She was Natasha Williams, one of the most influential women in America. The press would never forget her name. Weeks passed, and Natasha's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer just a figure in the background, no longer the quiet waitress who had once endured countless indignities at the hands of those who felt entitled to control her life. Now, she was an icon of change. Her name was on the tip of every journalist's tongue, her story broadcast on every major news channel. She was a woman who had brought down a network of corruption, who had used her intelligence and patience to expose the powerful men who had believed themselves untouchable. She had turned her suffering into a weapon, and now her actions would inspire generations to come. But even as the accolades poured in, Natasha remained grounded. She hadn't done it for fame. She hadn't done it to be recognized. No, Natasha had done it because she couldn't stand by and watch the system that had broken so many, her Maria, Jessica, continue to thrive. She had dismantled Kevin's empire, but there was so much more to be done. Late one evening, Natasha sat at her desk in her apartment, the city's lights flickering outside her window. Alessandro had just left for a meeting, and she was alone, poring over case files and reports. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up, seeing the name of her lawyer flash across the screen. Natasha, the lawyer said when she answered, "I have good news. We received confirmation. Your organization, the Williams Moretti Institute for Combating Corruption, has been granted federal funding. It's official now. You're going to change the way things are done in this country." Her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she had achieved. This was just the beginning. Natasha wasn't just fighting for justice. She was creating a new path, a way for others to follow in her footsteps. The thought of all the lives she would touch, the system she would bring down, made her feel both humbled and powerful. She had turned her own shame into strength, and now she would help others do the same. But as much as her work gave her a sense of fulfillment, there was another part of her life that continued to stir with tension: the love between her and Alessandro. Their marriage had always been strong, but the past few months had been a whirlwind. He had supported her every step of the way, but Natasha could feel the distance growing between them. He was proud of her, no doubt, but the weight of her newfound fame and the responsibility that came with it had changed the dynamic between them. That evening, when Alessandro returned, he found her still sitting at her desk, her fingers tapping nervously against the edge of her papers. "Natasha," he said softly, walking over to her. He crouched beside her, lifting her chin gently so that their eyes met. "You're changing the world. You're making a difference. But you don't have to do it alone." His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the unease she had been carrying for so long. She had always prided herself on her independence, on standing on her own 2 feet. But in that moment, she realized that she didn't have to fight alone. Alessandro was there, just as he had always been. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've just been so caught up in everything. I didn't want to disappoint you." Alessandro smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You could never disappoint me. You are everything I've always known you could be. But you don't have to carry all the weight of the world on your shoulders alone. We're in this together." Her heart swelled with affection, and without thinking, she leaned forward, kissing him softly, a kiss that was both tender and filled with a deep, unspoken promise. This kiss wasn't just about love. It was about understanding, about mutual respect, about 2 people who had been through everything together and were now stronger for it. As their lips parted, Natasha looked into Alessandro's eyes, her expression soft but resolute. "We have so much more to do, Alessandro. I'm not finished yet." "I know," he said, his voice filled with admiration and quiet determination. "And I'll be right here with you every step of the way." The night stretched on, and as Natasha lay in bed beside Alessandro, her thoughts raced with plans for the future. She had a lot of work ahead of her, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control. She wasn't just a woman who had been overlooked. She was the woman who had changed the rules, who had broken the chains that had once held her down. As she drifted off to sleep, Alessandro's steady breathing beside her, Natasha's mind swirled with the weight of what was to come. But she was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkest parts of herself and emerged stronger, more powerful, and more determined than ever before. In the weeks that followed, Natasha's influence continued to grow. Her name was mentioned in the same breath as the most powerful figures in politics and business, and yet she never let it get to her head. She remained grounded, focused on her mission, and determined to make the world a better place, one step at a time. But as much as her work defined her, Natasha never forgot the personal journey she had undertaken. She knew that her greatest victory wasn't the destruction of Kevin Torres or the exposure of the corruption network. It was the transformation of herself. The woman who had once been invisible was now a force to be reckoned with. She had turned her pain into power, and now she would use that power to create lasting change. As Natasha's influence spread across the city, she couldn't help but feel the pull of a deeper connection, one that had grown slowly and steadily, like a flame building into a fire. She had been so focused on exposing the corruption, on dismantling Kevin's empire, that she hadn't allowed herself the time to reflect on the other forces at play in her life. The force of her love for Alessandro, which had always been a steady, quiet undercurrent beneath her ambition, was now starting to burn brightly, demanding attention. They had been through so much together, from their first meeting, when he had been nothing more than a mysterious stranger, to their quiet marriage, to the way he had supported her through this tumultuous journey. Alessandro had never once doubted her, never once questioned her ability to succeed. His faith in her had been unwavering, even when she hadn't been sure of herself. Yet, despite their deep connection, Natasha knew that something had shifted in their relationship. As the press continued to report on her triumphs, as her name appeared on the cover of newspapers and magazines, a sense of distance had grown between them. Alessandro, though always by her side, seemed to withdraw slightly, as though the weight of her newfound fame was something he could not fully embrace. It was one night, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings and press conferences, that Natasha decided to confront him. She found him in the living room, staring out the window at the city below, his face unreadable. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly, approaching him from behind. "I know you're proud of me, Alessandro, but it feels like you've been holding something back." He turned to face her, his expression softening. "I am proud of you, Natasha. You've done something incredible. But sometimes I feel like I'm losing you in all of this. You're becoming a symbol, a force in your own right. And I don't know where I fit into all of it." Her heart clenched at his words. She had always known that her ambition would change the dynamic of their relationship, but she had never imagined it would create a divide. They had been partners in everything. But now, she realized the weight of her success was beginning to push them apart. "Alessandro," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "you've always been my strength. You've supported me from the very beginning. But I need you to understand, I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this for both of us, for our future." He stepped toward her, his hands gently cupping her face. "I know, darling. I don't want to lose you in the process. I want us to be a team, not just in business, but in life." For the first time in weeks, Natasha allowed herself to be vulnerable. She closed her eyes as he pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. She needed him as much as he needed her, and for a brief moment, the world outside, the constant media attention, the corruption she had exposed, the people who had come to rely on her, faded away. It was just the two of them, together. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, her lips brushing against his ear. As the weeks went by, Natasha found a delicate balance between her work and her relationship with Alessandro. They continued to build their empire, expanding the Williams Moretti Institute and using their platform to fight for justice. But they also made time for each other. Quiet evenings, intimate dinners, and passionate nights that brought them closer than ever before. It was during one of these nights, when Natasha was wrapped in Alessandro's arms, that she realized how far she had come. She had once been a victim of a system that had treated her like nothing more than an object to be used. Now, she was a force of nature, powerful, respected, and loved. And yet, as she lay beside Alessandro, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was waiting for her. Her victory over Kevin had been just the beginning. There was still so much more to do, so many more systems to tear down. "Natasha," Alessandro said, his voice low and filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "You're a force, but promise me you'll never forget what we built together. Promise me you'll never forget the person you were before all of this." She smiled softly, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw. "I promise," she said, her voice steady and filled with certainty. "But I'll never stop fighting for what's right. Not for me, not for you, but for the people who need us." As the night deepened, the world outside faded into the background. There, in their private sanctuary, Natasha and Alessandro shared a moment of quiet intimacy, their love stronger than ever. But as they held each other close, Natasha's mind was already working, already planning the next move. There was no time to rest, no time to stop fighting. Her journey had just begun. The days turned into weeks, and Natasha found herself deeper in her work than she had ever been before. As her influence grew, so did the pressure. There were always more meetings, more people to meet, more alliances to solidify. The media attention was relentless. Everywhere she went, cameras were flashing, microphones were shoved in her face, and reporters bombarded her with questions. But Natasha had learned how to handle it. She had learned to navigate the chaos, just as she had done with the tangled web of corruption that had once ensnared her. Despite all the attention, one thing had remained constant in her life: Alessandro. He was there, always, as supportive and loving as ever. But even he couldn't escape the strain of their new reality. It was subtle at first. The quiet moments where he would look at her with an unreadable expression, or the long silences between them at dinner. She could feel the distance creeping in, slowly, like a shadow that grew longer as the day wore on. One night, after another successful media event, Natasha returned home to find Alessandro sitting in the dim light of their living room, his face turned away from her. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of her work that she hadn't noticed a change in him. "Alessandro," she called softly, her voice tentative. She felt a pang in her chest, a familiar sense of unease. He turned toward her, his expression softened by the flickering candlelight. But Natasha could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The weight of everything they had built together was pressing on him. "Natasha," he began, his voice low, his tone filled with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "I'm proud of you. I really am. But I'm afraid that the woman I fell in love with is slipping away. You're so focused on the work, so focused on the next step, that I'm losing the connection we had." His words cut through her, and she felt the walls she had built around her heart crack just slightly. He wasn't wrong. The constant push for justice, the relentless fight for the truth, had consumed her. In the process, she had distanced herself from the one person who had always been by her side. She crossed the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and knelt beside him. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the depth of the connection between them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to push you away. I've been so focused on everything else. But you're right. I've been losing myself in all of this." Alessandro's hand found hers, squeezing it gently as he looked into her eyes. "I need you, Natasha. Not the public figure, not the woman who fights for justice. I need you, the woman I love, the woman who used to laugh with me over dinner, who would hold me close at night, who would let me in without any walls." Her heart ached at his words. The love between them had always been strong, but now it felt as if they were both fighting different battles, one for justice and one for their love. Natasha had fought so hard to build her empire, to prove herself, to show the world her worth. But in doing so, she had unknowingly alienated the one person who had always believed in her. "I need you, too," Natasha whispered, her lips trembling with the weight of her confession. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I've been so focused on proving myself that I forgot what really matters. I've neglected us. I've neglected you." Alessandro pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, the world outside faded. The chaos, the media, the pressure, all of it melted away as she buried her face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady and filled with love. "Always." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Natasha realized something important. She had spent so much of her life proving her worth to the world, but now she needed to prove her love to the one person who mattered most. She needed to show Alessandro that they were still a team, that no matter how high she climbed, he would always be her equal, her partner in every sense of the word. The next day, Natasha made a decision. She would continue her fight for justice, but she would also fight for her marriage, for the love that had always been her foundation. She would no longer let her ambition blind her to the people who mattered most. And so, she set out to balance the two parts of her life, the world-changing work she was doing and the quiet, intimate moments she shared with Alessandro. She knew that she couldn't have one without the other, and she wasn't willing to lose either. Later that week, as the two of them stood in their bedroom, the city lights casting a soft glow through the windows, Alessandro reached for her, his hand brushing against her arm. "I love you," he whispered, his voice hushed with the raw emotion that had been building between them for weeks. "I've always loved you." Natasha's heart fluttered as she turned to face him, her gaze soft and filled with affection. "I love you, too," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm so sorry for pushing you away." He smiled, a slow, tender smile that made her heart race. "You've always been the woman I admired," he said softly. "But now, I'm ready to show you how much I love you. You're not just a powerhouse in the world, Natasha. You're my everything. And I'm here always." With those words, Natasha felt a wave of warmth flood her chest. She closed the space between them, kissing him gently, then more deeply. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and filled with the intensity of everything that had been building between them. The passion that had simmered under the surface for so long finally erupted, leaving them both breathless and wanting more. Their love was never just about the big moments. It was in the small, quiet moments of vulnerability, of shared laughter, of mutual understanding. And as their kiss deepened, Natasha knew that no matter what happened, no matter what battles lay ahead, she would always have him by her side. Together, they could conquer anything. The weeks that followed were filled with moments of profound connection and quiet reflection. Natasha and Alessandro found themselves carving out time for each other in the midst of their busy schedules. There were late-night walks by the lake, dinners by candlelight, and stolen kisses in the quiet corners of their home. It wasn't just about the physical connection, though that was undeniably intense. It was the unspoken bond that had always existed between them, the one that had been tested but never broken. Despite the pressure of running the Williams Moretti Institute, Natasha found herself more present, more attuned to the subtle shifts in her relationship with Alessandro. They had come a long way since that first night of tension and distance. Now, every glance, every touch between them spoke volumes. One evening, as they sat in the warmth of their living room, the flicker of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls, Natasha turned to Alessandro. He had been unusually quiet, his gaze distant, but filled with something she couldn't place. "Alessandro," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "What's on your mind?" He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as though trying to find the words. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next," he said, his voice thick with thought. "We've made so many changes, Natasha. But I know there's still more to do, more battles to fight." Natasha squeezed his hand gently. "We've come so far. Together, we'll face whatever comes next together." He nodded, but she could sense the undercurrent of something else, something he hadn't quite shared with her. "You've always been my strength," he said, his voice a little softer, more vulnerable than she was used to hearing. But I need you to understand, it's not just about fighting for justice or exposing corruption. We built something amazing, Natasha, but I want to build a future with you. One that's not just about the work, but about us, about us. The weight of his words hit her deeply. She had been so focused on her mission, so wrapped up in the fight for what was right, that she had nearly forgotten the most important part of her life, him. She had been consumed by the world she was building, but the love they shared was the foundation of everything else. Without him, there would be nothing. She leaned closer, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "I want that too, Alessandro. I've always wanted that, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." The air between them shifted, charged with an intensity that only grew as she reached for him, pulling him close. Their kiss was slow, tender, but with an undeniable hunger. It wasn't just about passion. It was about everything they'd been through, everything they'd built together, every moment of struggle, every victory, every shared glance had led them here. And as their kiss deepened, Natasha knew that this was the beginning of something even greater. She slid her fingers into his hair, tugging him closer, their bodies aligning as the world outside their bubble ceased to exist. The heat between them grew, but so did the emotional connection, as if they were finally able to shed the last remnants of distance that had separated them. "I've missed this," she whispered against his lips, her breath catching. "I've missed you. You're everything to me," Alessandro breathed, his hands tracing the curve of her back, pulling her closer. "Nothing matters more than this, than us." The night was theirs, a slow dance of love and longing, of the future they were building and the present they cherished. Every touch, every kiss, was a promise that no matter what the world threw their way, they would always have each other. The following days were filled with renewed passion, and Natasha's mind became a mix of both her professional ambitions and her renewed connection to Alessandro. The whirlwind of publicity that came with her victories continued, but she was no longer overwhelmed. Now, she balanced it with the quiet, intimate moments that grounded her. She had everything she had ever wanted. The love of a man who saw her for who she truly was, not just a woman who had brought down a corrupt empire. One evening, as they sat in their favorite corner of the house, Alessandro turned to her with a new look in his eyes, one of determination and something deeper. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "what if we started our own charity? A foundation for women, for people like you who fought so hard and been overlooked." Natasha smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "I think that's a brilliant idea," she replied, "but only if you're ready to share the spotlight. We'll need to do it together. I won't carry this alone." "Together," he repeated, his hand finding hers, a sense of mutual understanding settling between them. "We'll do this together. Everything we do from here on out, Natasha, it's for both of us." And just like that, Natasha realized that she had found the perfect balance. She had fought hard, proved herself, and made her mark on the world. But she didn't have to fight alone anymore. Alessandro, her partner, her equal, was right beside her every step of the way. As they leaned into each other, Natasha felt a deep sense of contentment. The future was uncertain, but with Alessandro by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. Days turned into weeks, and Natasha's world continued to expand in ways she had never imagined. The foundation she had always dreamed of creating was now a reality, her work growing more impactful with every passing day. She had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and justice, a woman who had risen above the hardships of her past to create a future for herself and for others who had been silenced. Yet, even as her professional life flourished, the private moments she shared with Alessandro were where she found her true peace. Despite the constant media presence, despite the weight of her responsibilities, it was in the quiet moments with him that Natasha felt whole. One evening, as the two of them sat together in their living room, a soft rain tapping against the windows, Natasha found herself looking at Alessandro in a way she hadn't in a long time, really looking at him. He had always been her rock, the one constant in her life. He had believed in her when no one else did, stood by her when the world seemed to crumble around her. But now, she saw him not just as her partner in business, but as a man who had truly shared her soul, who had shared every victory, every loss. "Alessandro," she said softly, her voice full of the weight of her thoughts. "I've been thinking about everything we built together. I want more than just the success. I want to make sure that we're creating something that matters. For us, for the future." Alessandro turned to face her, his eyes full of understanding, his hand finding hers across the table. "I know, and I want that too, Natasha. But I also want us to enjoy this, to really experience what we've achieved. We fought so hard. Now it's time to find balance, to take care of each other." She smiled, the warmth of his words settling in her chest. It was easy to forget to slow down, to just be in the moment when everything around her moved at such a fast pace. But in that moment, as she looked into his eyes, Natasha realized that there was nothing more important than what they shared. She had fought for justice, for the truth, for the change she believed in. But her love for Alessandro had always been the core of her strength. "You're right," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "I've been so focused on what comes next. But you're my home. This, us, is what I've always wanted." Alessandro leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead in a tender kiss. The simple touch was enough to convey everything they had shared. Their love, their struggles, their victories, and the quiet moments in between. They had built this life together, and together they would continue to build it brick by brick, hand in hand. As the night wore on, Natasha felt her heart swell with a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She had taken control of her life, had reclaimed her power, but in doing so, she had found something far more precious than any victory or recognition. She had found her partner, her equal, her love. The weeks that followed were filled with moments of quiet joy. They spent weekends traveling together, exploring new places, sharing intimate moments away from the prying eyes of the public. They were no longer just partners in business. They were partners in life, in every sense of the word. But even as Natasha reveled in the peace she had found, the weight of her mission never fully left her. She was still determined to continue her work with the Williams Moretti Institute, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The corruption that had been exposed was only the beginning. She was just getting started. One evening, as she and Alessandro sat on their balcony overlooking the city, Natasha turned to him, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "We need to expand," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've made a difference here in Chicago, but there's so much more to do. I want to start a national campaign, a movement." Alessandro smiled, his admiration for her growing with every word she spoke. "I knew you'd say that," he said with a chuckle, "and I'll be right beside you every step of the way." The weight of the world still pressed down on Natasha's shoulders, but she no longer carried it alone. Alessandro was there, supporting her, loving her, and together they would continue to fight for the change they so desperately wanted to see. Their relationship had deepened, transformed into something that was not only built on love, but also on mutual respect, shared ambition, and the understanding that together they were unstoppable. It was no longer about her success or his. It was about them, as a team, building something that would last long after the cameras stopped flashing. As the night stretched on, the city lights twinkling below them, Natasha leaned back in her chair, her hand resting comfortably in Alessandro's. She had fought for everything she had, and now she realized the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, She wouldn't fight alone. As the months passed, Natasha's influence continued to grow, but so did the complexities of her personal and professional life. She had succeeded in dismantling the corruption network, had exposed Kevin's empire, and had created something far more powerful, a movement for change. The Williams Moretti Institute was flourishing, and Natasha's voice was now one that demanded to be heard, not just in Chicago, but across the country. But even as her influence spread, she remained grounded, always returning to the one thing that had brought her peace, her love for Alessandro. The quiet moments they shared, dinner dates in their favorite restaurant, slow walks through the park, tender kisses under the soft glow of the streetlights, reminded Natasha of the foundation she had built her life on. The love they shared had been the anchor that had kept her steady during the most turbulent times. And now, it was a fire that fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Natasha looked at Alessandro, her eyes filled with both affection and something deeper. She had been thinking about their journey together, about how far they had come. They had fought the world together, faced their demons and conquered them. But there was one more thing, one last step that Natasha felt compelled to take. "I think it's time," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. Alessandro looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. Time for what, love? To take this, us, to the next level. To make sure our legacy lasts. I want us to make it official. Not just as partners, not just as leaders in this movement, but as a family. I want us to build something that endures, something that lives beyond the work we're doing, a place for us and for our future. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything was still. The weight of the moment, the gravity of what they had built, settled between them. This wasn't just about their business. It was about their life together, their commitment to each other, and the future they both envisioned. Alessandro smiled, a slow, knowing smile that spoke volumes. He had always known this moment would come, the moment Natasha would take the final step and allow herself to fully embrace everything she had fought for. And now, as he looked into her eyes, he knew without a doubt that this was where they were meant to be. "I'm with you, always," he said softly, his voice full of promise. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was both tender and filled with the promise of all that was to come. It was a kiss that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that would be filled with new dreams, new challenges, and new victories. As they pulled away from the kiss, Natasha felt the weight of the world shift. She wasn't just Natasha, the waitress who had once been invisible. She wasn't just Natasha, the woman who had brought down a corrupt empire. She was Natasha, a woman who had fought for what was right and had found not only success, but the love of her life in the process. And with Alessandro by her side, she knew there was nothing she couldn't do. They had already changed the world together. Now, they would build a future that would last for generations to come, a future where their love, their commitment, and their legacy would stand as a beacon for others to follow. As the night stretched on, Natasha felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had been through the storm, and now the calm had come. It wasn't just about the work, the justice, or the fight for what was right. It was about her, about Alessandro, and about the life they were creating together. And as they stood up, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, Natasha couldn't help but smile. This was the beginning of a new adventure, a journey she would take not just as a leader, but as a woman who had everything she had ever wanted: love, purpose, and a future filled with endless possibilities. Have you ever fought for your dreams? Do you believe in the power of love and redemption? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of transformation and triumph.